Hi, I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hope and Possibilities podcast. And this episode is really to talk about what I'm seeing for 2026 and for the future. And honestly, what I'm seeing is a move away from my work with hybrid remote and actually just embedding that into leadership. In my personal opinion, we are not going away from flexibility. We are not going away from hybrid remote. What we are going away from, and what some of us will go away from, is the debate about who has permission to grant us the access to the type of work that we want. It's what the people want. If you talk to people, a lot of times what they need is flexible schedules, the ability to make a decision on the day because of what's happening with childcare, what's happening with elder care, what's happening with the weather, travel schedules, all kinds of different things, all kinds of different reasons. But that flexibility to treat each individual as a person capable of making decisions that are in the best interest for themselves personally and for the business, that's something that people want, right? And people are going to start working in ways that give them more of what they want. There's all kinds of studies that have recently come out that basically said that well-being, that sense of well-being, that sense of autonomy, that sense of flexibility, it's work-life integration. And that's more valuable to people than compensation. Now, people are going to get that bent because people hear the word money and they automatically think that's the be all and end all. But in practice, what we're seeing is people actually making choices that are in line with what they need financially, but also how they embed their work into their life so that they get more of what they need to make their families function. And family could look like anything, right? Whatever's important to that specific person. How does your day look? Who do you live with? Who do you interact with? And where does work fit into that? And how do you choose what makes the most sense for you? Now, the circular debate is really caused by people who are trying to retain identity. They're trying to retain process. They're trying to retain power and control. And they have ingrained narratives about the way the world works, right? Real estate is a big factor of that. But it's also identity. If you are a leader and real estate has been good to you, both personally, professionally, how do you make the choice to actually back away from real estate and recognize that the depreciation that people have been talking about is a real thing? How do you convince your board of that? It's a challenging thing because what you're asking people to do is reset mindsets about the way the world works. And that's where that circular debate comes in because so many people are invested in this. If you have 20 years of working in building maintenance, in designing offices and employee experience built around in person events, you have a vested interest in the way that real estate and space contain people. And that's your track record, that's your CV. In moving away from that's a pivot that you then have to explain. People don't do that kind of thing unless they're really motivated to do that. And to have external forces push them in that direction, that's a challenging thing. But what we're actually seeing is convergence because since the pandemic, there's been a distinct move, obviously, towards flexibility and the hybrid remote way of working. But what now is happening is AI is being introduced, right? And depending on who you are, what you think about AI, that's still going to change how people work because AI never sleeps. So if you're integrating AI into your role and AI is doing transactional things that AI is capable of doing right now, AI doesn't need to be in a building. AI doesn't need to be in a physical space. AI can be influenced without monitoring body language. So, what does that look like? The current narrative that's going on right now is that AI is likely to shrink the workforce, meaning that there's going to be fewer and fewer people. So, this push, this narrative to bring people back to an office is in direct conflict with the narrative that we're seeing around AI. Now, I personally don't think either narrative is right. I think that there's going to be something new and creative because I'm always suspicious about a narrative where people are told that human beings aren't worth betting on, that human beings are going to go away. We're going to reduce headcount. If you reduce headcount, who's actually going to be buying your products? Because nobody's going to actually have money. Then you get into the whole government benefit scheme. And what does that look like? And how long is that going to take to work out? So I personally don't think we've come across a narrative of what the future is actually going to be that's compelling, that's persuasive. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. But again, that's going to be developed over years. It's going to be incremental in the way that we approach that. So, what really matters are the choices we make. And that's where my pivot from focusing just solely on what up until now I've been most proud of, which is my ability to actually influence the hybrid remote adoption of policy, how to make that work smoothly, how to advise companies on how to adopt it. It feels restricted right now because I don't think that it ends solely there. I think it's a leadership decision. I think it's more of a question about reinvention and ongoing continual change. Change is not a project anymore. It's actually a reinvention that's never going to stop because there's so many variables coming at us in all different aspects of life and work that what we're looking at is how do we reinvent identities? How do we reinvent organizations to redistribute work, redistribute tasks, redistribute value? What matters to people? How do we make people matter? People show up and do a good job when they feel that they have a sense of purpose and they feel that they themselves matter. And what we're seeing in the narratives right now, especially the AI narrative, is there's a certain type of leadership out there that basically says people don't matter. That's never going to be something I'm going to put my weight behind because I think people and wisdom, all the things that matter to human beings, are far more important than this narrow story that tech founders are spending right now. That's really only going to benefit a very narrow section of the population and is really going to be detrimental to others. When somebody is telling you that something is guaranteed and this is the way it's going to be, and they're giving you that prediction, futurists don't give prediction. They look at trends and scenarios and convergences. And that's what I'm seeing is we have to look at the decisions that we're making. And that leads me into the leadership aspect, right? And that's how are you reducing your risk? How are you growing your potential and your business? And how are you doing this credibly and sustainably? That's really what the choice is going to be because you don't know the future. And the future is coming at us faster than ever before. It's important to look at the way that we're making those decisions, what data we're using to support them, and how we trust that any of this is the right direction, right? So this is where I'm going to be pivoting the business into more of that. It's really a matter of discernment as well, too. And discernment is a really tough thing to teach anyone because it's fundamentally based in emotional intelligence, but it's also based in what your history has been, what your skills are, who you trust, pattern recognition, how you connect the dots, and how do you take that from an individual level and apply that at an organizational level. And discernment is important for everyone, especially with the way that misinformation is becoming so prevalent, and even how AI is pulling data and how it's being trained. How do you know that what you're reading is actually true and reliable and trustworthy? Discernment has become, honestly, one of the biggest things that I'm concerned about as well too, and especially in a leadership aspect. You really have to be able to have those tough conversations about how all of that feeds into the decisions you're making, both you as an individual and you as an organization. And I think that's the bigger conversation where I can be more useful. So again, it's not that I don't believe in hybrid remote or flexibility. I absolutely do. I think it's the way of the future. We're seeing all these things about the 4-day work week. That all ties into this conversation about the universal benefit and how people are going to make money, and it's going to be not necessarily just what they're able to earn from employment, but it's also the side projects, the portfolio careers. All of these things are converging to make work be something completely different than what we've seen up until now. But there are forces that are going to drag us backwards. How do you anchor yourself so that you feel safe and stable? And then how do you make that trust leap to move into the next? How do you cross that threshold into what's going to be your future? That's the more interesting conversation, right? And that's where I think that I can be of more value. So fundamentally, it's all part and parcel of it. And again, this is more of a love letter to the future of work. So I'm going to be changing how I work on LinkedIn, how I do newsletters, how I do email. You're probably going to see less of me on a lot of the social media that I do, because I do think that long form is really where I need to be more than anything else. And I'm going to be switching up what I do with the podcast. I don't think I'm going to be doing guest episodes unless there's a guest I just can't resist, and the opportunity to have a conversation is irresistible. I think that I'm going to be using this as a way to flesh out conversations that need to be had, that nuance. And that's something I'm going to be experimenting with more. What can the podcast be? Who knew it was going to be a global globes category now? Podcasting has come so much further than I ever thought it would going to be when I started this 5 years ago. Now, I have issues with the way that the Golden Globes actually created the criteria and who's eligible to win those awards. But realistically, I'm also not doing podcasting because I want to win awards. I'm using it for a specific reason directly related to my business and how I communicate and help people think through these types of thorny types of problems. And it's not thought leadership, it's how do you lead thought? And that's what I'm interested in. So that's how I plan to use the podcast as well. So you'll see more of that. And my plan really is podcast, newsletters, so LinkedIn, Substack, and also email. I'm really going to lean into email because I really have not done a good job. I have created email lists. I do have a whole raft of people who have subscribed to newsletters and things that I write, but I'm going to be tweaking that and cleaning those lists and asking people to unsubscribe if the new direction isn't necessarily what they're after with, so I can identify people that truly want to be in conversation with me. Because what I find is a lot of people follow me, but nobody really ever has those conversations on an ongoing basis. The people who actually speak to me about things that matter to them, that's a really small kind of group of people. And I'd like to get more of the people who are willing to commit to actual change and have those conversations and then work through that, right? So I haven't found the magic in terms of how I create a safe space for those types of conversations that lead into actual business. So that's what I'm working on an ongoing basis. So anyways, that's my plan for 2026. I will be trying to lay out content that will support that more, but this is the first thing that I wanted to start with, and hopefully you find that interesting. I will actually be including a link. I've been testing out a way for you to interact with the podcast. You can actually leave a voicemail and send me questions If you record a message, you can indicate to me whether you'd like me to be able to use that as clips in the podcast. Questions are the lifeblood of how you stay on top of what people are thinking. And getting that type of information, that's really such a valuable. So, what ways work for that? TikTok, lots of people talk about TikTok being a fount for questions, but I just find TikTok to be a little bit toxic. Not to mention, it's also really dominated by certain demographics and countries. So I'm interested in the people who are willing to speak directly to me in a way that feels safe to them without actually having to go through the gates of hell on public comment forums like TikTok. So that's what I'm experimenting with as well too. So check the show notes for that. And I'll also put it in my LinkedIn thing when I share this. I'll put it on Substack as well too. So anyways, hopefully that's interesting to you. I'd love to know what you're thinking about, what questions are keeping you up at night. The thorny pieces of identity that really keep on coming up is, who are you going to be if you have to move away from what has always worked for you? So that's an interesting thing. A lot of times people don't find these questions until they've actually been laid off, or they retire, or they move, or whatever happens to interrupt their life. A lot of times it's called life quakes. Life quakes are an interesting thing to explore. But those are the types of questions I'd love to hear more about. What keeps you awake? What helps you think about the future in a different way? And we don't have to have answers. It's more about how are you thinking about it? That's the fun part. So anyways, talk soon. Bye.